This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
And so today what we're looking at is the beginning of the end. And so in chapter 12, let's read these first few verses. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. How interesting. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me." When the large crowd of Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. I've always found that verse fascinating, that they decided they were going to kill Lazarus also, because of what he represented. And I've always wondered what Lazarus must have felt like. Oh man, not again. I got to go through this again? It must have been rather intimidating. But it also speaks to why Matthew and Mark don't talk about Lazarus. Remember, probably because when that was written, when that was given, Lazarus was still alive, and so they were protecting Lazarus, and so you'll hear about Mary and Martha, but you won't hear about Lazarus. The only time you hear about Lazarus is in the Gospel of John, and which was written later. And so this is probably why we don't hear about Lazarus anywhere else, because they knew that his life was in danger. So in this fascinating passage, we're going to discover something, and I want you to take notes on this, because in these 11 verses, we discover what you should do for the rest of your life. Now, these are the last 2 weeks of Jesus' life, his human life. And in this passage of Scripture, we see some principles that we can take and apply on what you should do for the rest of your life. This is part of the beginning of the end for Jesus. Remember how we talked about turning points a couple of weeks ago? This is part of that turning point in Jesus' life. He's now into the home stretch of his life on earth. And in this passage, we discover these 5 principles of living out the rest of your life. And these are principles that we should take and learn. You need to take and learn these principles. These are things that you should do for the rest of your life, no matter how long or how short that may be. Some of you will have, Jesus had 2 weeks left. You might have 2 weeks or less. Some of you may have 20, 30, 40, 50 years left. It doesn't matter. These are principles that you need to apply and do for the rest of your life. And so I would recommend that you write these down and even put them somewhere where you can see them every morning when you wake up and just say, this is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to live my life this way. These are things that we need to be doing in our life every day. And the first thing begins with verses 1 and 2, John 12, 1 and 2. Celebrate God's victories. Celebrate God's victories. Jesus comes back to Bethany. And he comes back, he's there for right before the Passover, and they gave him a dinner. And it wasn't just a dinner for him, it was a dinner that celebrated the fact that what he had done for Lazarus. This is something that you should do not only for God's victories in your life, but also for the victories that God has in other people's lives. We need to celebrate God's victories in our lives, but we should also celebrate God's victories in other people's lives. Now, there are 2 ways that we celebrate God's victories in our lives. First one is through praise. Praise. Praise is adoration of God for who He is. Adoration of God for who He is. Psalm 34:1 says, "I will bless the Lord at all times," which, by the way, is a word for praise. "And His praise shall continually be in my mouth." I'm going to adore God for who He is. Psalm 47, verses 6 and 7. Sing praises to God. Sing praises. Sing praises to our King. Sing praises. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing praises with a psalm. Praises. Adoration of God for who He is. The second way that we celebrate the victories of God is through thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is adoration of God for what He's done. Two different things. Praise is adoration for who God is. Thanksgiving is adoration for what He's done. Psalm 50, verses 14 and 15 say this: Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving. Perform your vows to the Most High. Call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. Adoration of God for what He's done. The things that He has done, the things that you know that He's going to do, the things that you're going to depend on Him to do. Give Him thanks for those things. Why not thank God in advance? We don't just have to thank God for the past, we can thank Him for the future. God, I know that there are going to be issues in my life and crises in my life that I'm not even aware of right now. I want to thank You that I can trust You for those times. I want to thank You that I can depend on You for those times. And how can you begin to depend on God for those times? You depend on God for those times because you're discovering that He is there and faithful in those past times. It's thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is adoration of God for what He's done. Psalm 95:2 says, Let us come into His presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to Him with songs of praise. Praise and thanksgiving. Two ways that we celebrate God's victories in our life. Begin praising Him and thanking Him for past, for future, for those issues in your life, and also for those issues in other people's lives.
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.